They laughed when my father raised his glass and called me wasted space. The sound wasn't loud. It was a spreading stain, a poison seeping into the polished silence of my family's Thanksgiving table. My mother's precious Waterford crystal shivered, not from the Charleston wind, but from the chill of their collective dismissal. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Inside, a cold, final calm settled over me. This was the diagnosis I had always suspected, now confirmed. My hand slipped into my pocket. My thumb found my phone. Click. I recorded it. I wanted the evidence, the specific, cruel timbre of my brother's laugh, the clinking of glasses toasting my irrelevance. When the laughter died into smug, satisfied silence, I spoke. My voice was a scalpel, clean and sharp. "You're right, Dad," I said. The room froze. "It is crowded in here. Which is why it's good I won't be here next year. I just put a deposit on a place 3,000 miles away." The silence that followed was a physical blow. My mother's whispered, "Quinn, don't," was the family motto, etched on my soul. Don't make this hard for him. I stood, the heavy mahogany table, a dark, gleaming beast my father loved more than his own daughter, a monument to everything I was leaving behind. "He's not the one who has to pack," I said, my eyes locking with my father's. The gathering storm in his face was a familiar weather pattern. I was finally choosing to step out of it. I walked out of that house, that life, that lie, into the biting salt air of the Ashley River. It felt like truth. I got into my beat-up Ford, the one thing I'd ever bought without his approval, and drove. I drove until the manicured gardens and gaslit porches of Charleston blurred into a beautiful, suffocating prison in my rearview mirror. I needed to go somewhere his voice couldn't reach. Somewhere cold and hard and honest. A name surfaced in my mind, a dot on the edge of the world: Kodiak, Alaska. My new home was a corrugated tin shed by a boatyard that smelled of diesel, salt, and fish. It was freezing, rusted, and mine. That first night, huddled in a sleeping bag on the concrete floor, the doubt was a creeping frost. He was right. "You're a joke. You will fail." But then I reached for my old transistor radio, the first thing I'd ever fixed. I turned it on. The tubes hummed to life, a tiny, warm heartbeat in the vast, crushing dark. It was the sound of my own capability. The sound of a system that worked. The next morning, I got to work. I started with what the ocean had discarded, waterlogged planks from a decommissioned trawler. This wood wasn't pristine. It was scarred, seasoned by storms, and stronger for it. I didn't sand away its history. I filled its cracks with dark epoxy, turning its wounds into honor scars. The table I built was heavy, solid, indestructible. But the tabletop was never the point. The point was what held it up. I designed a new kind of leg. A modular, adjustable system. A child, an elder, someone in a wheelchair. They could all sit at the exact same height. No one would be below the salt. No one would have to crane their neck to be heard. I called it equal seats. The first person who understood wasn't a corporate buyer. It was a teacher from a remote village, who saw past the rough wood and saw the mechanism. "This," she said, her finger tracing the steel pin. "This is what I need." I delivered the tables myself. A week later, she sent a photo, her students, all in a perfect, messy circle. A boy in a walker was slotted in, his work surface level with the tallest girl. They were all looking at each other. They were laughing. That photo was a spark. Orders trickled in. A soup kitchen. A library. A clinic. I wasn't just building furniture. I was building relationships. I was building a community. Then the storm came. Not just a storm of wind and ice that tried to tear my tin roof from over my head, but a storm from my past. A corporate giant, Harbor Crown, offered to buy me out. When I refused, they tried to destroy me. They stole my open-source designs and sued me for patent infringement. They spread lies that my tables were unsafe. They thought this was a battle about furniture. They were wrong. This was a war about power. I didn't fight them in a courtroom. I fought them with the truth. I went live to the world, showing my tables holding impossible weight, my team standing on them, unshakable. I showed their fraudulent claims. And I showed my community, the fishermen, the teachers, the nurses, who stood with me. We didn't just win. We routed them. They were forced to fund the very movement they tried to kill. But the final battle wasn't fought with lawyers or live streams. It was fought at a table. I hosted a new table night, a potluck for my island family. The warehouse was strung with lights, filled with the smell of stew and cider, and 100 different stories. And in the center sat my masterpiece, a vast slab of Claro walnut, a gift from an old mentor. On its underside I had carved my creed: no head, equal hearts. He showed up uninvited. My father, Patrick Donovan. He walked in, a king entering a republic, his expensive coat dusted with Alaskan snow. He tried to find the head of my round table. Failing, he dragged a chair to an end and created one. He raised a glass to give a toast, to absorb my victory into his narrative. But this wasn't his table. Before he could speak, a gentle notification from my seating app flashed on the wall. A single speaker has been active for 120 seconds. We invite other voices to join. The room didn't get angry. They laughed. A warm, disbelieving laughter that celebrated a system where no one voice could dominate. He had been checkmated by a piece of code and a roomful of hearts. Then, the stories began. A shy student who now found his voice. A woman from a shelter who, for the first time in a decade, didn't have to eat with her head down. And then, my mother stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice was new. For 30 years, she said, looking at my father, I thought silence was peace. I was wrong. I was just erasing my own child. She turned to me, her eyes streaming. I am so sorry, Quinn. And I am so proud. This is not noise. This is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. The foundation of his world crumbled in that moment. His wife, his silent partner, had delivered the final, fatal testimony. When the app's turn finally came to him, he stood. The powerful patriarch was gone. In his place was just a man, old and tired. I am a man who builds things, he said, his voice hollow. I came here, and I didn't see what you were building. I was too busy looking at my own chair. He sat down. It wasn't an apology. It was a surrender. I walked over to him. He looked up, wary, expecting a final blow. I looked at the man who had called me wasted space, now sitting in a circle of people who knew my worth. That's okay, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. This table is wide enough for people who are willing to learn how to sit again. I turned from him, not in anger but in peace. I walked to my workbench and turned on my old transistor radio. A low, warm saxophone filled the room, a complex, intelligent jazz that spoke of community and shared creation. It was the sound of my victory. Not the sound of a throne being toppled, but the sound of a new table being built, with room for everyone. I finally had my seat. And I had built a world where everyone else could have theirs too.